welcome to this first edition of my game art direction series. This will be a short presentation. I'm aiming towards 20 minutes. It might slip a bit over. The idea is to talk about one topic every week or so, and then after that to have a discussion around said topic and or anything else related to game development and game art direction. So let's start. All right. So my name is Geneviève Routhier. I am a senior art director, currently working at Ubisoft. I've been working in the industry since 2003, which does not age me at all. So obviously I'm not in my 20s anymore. I've been doing this for 19 years. It's been rough sometimes, but it's also been exhilarating, and I still absolutely love working in this industry, and especially working as an art director. I'm a jack of all trades. I've had a not so common kind of career path. I started my career wanting to be a character modeler, but in the end, I ended up working in a third-party developer. And so when you're working in a third-party developer, you work for on tons of different projects, and you do all sorts of different things. So I had to learn a lot more than just 3D art and texturing, and so I worked in pixel art. I learned how to do UI design. I already knew how to do some graphic design, but I definitely honed my skills there too. I've done some concept art in my career. I've worked for most of my career in some form of a lead artist role. I've done other things, but basically that's the gist of it. Beyond the fact that I also worked as an art director, obviously. And I worked in indie games, not just AAA, even if most of my career has been done within the Ubisoft group, first in Montreal, and now I'm in Montpellier. And some games that I worked on, at least in the past years, well, you can tell from the images I'm posting. I'm not going to delve further into this. So the reason why we're here is to talk about how to think outside the box. And today's specific topic is the treatment, but especially which medium to use. And so you probably wonder, what do I mean by medium? Obviously, we're talking about video games, but I'll get into the topic right away. So first of all, before we start, I want to explain where I'm coming from and how I'm sorting what I mean by medium. Obviously, what I'm going to present is my point of view, is not necessarily a perfect definition. There are plenty of topics that I'll be talking about that kind of belong to different categories or overlap with different categories, but I want to present this framework as a way to sort different tasks that you have to do as an art director, and how to approach them, and also especially how to view the content that you have to develop through different lenses and different perspectives. The goal is also, quite frankly, to reflect on what other possibilities there are available to us as creatives and creators beyond the classic 3D or 2D looks that we're used to seeing. So, to me, what's inside the treatment is the tone. The tone is, what encompasses everything. Then the style and the medium. And so for me, the medium is inside those two things. So what's the style? So style is what we know is, like something is stylized, and that's the, like the in-between, the in-between classic word that we use is stylized. Something is stylized, and what do we mean by that is usually something in between something that is extremely cartoony and extremely graphic, let's just say, and then something that's very realistic and that is that attempts to be as credible and look like what actually exists in real life. This is a triangle that is more or less perfect. It's actually not perfect at all, but it's a good way to kind of view the way that you can treat your visuals. And so what are they? What is style? How is it influence? How do you play with style? Usually with your shape language, the volumes that you'll be using, the surface treatment, the proportions, etc. And here are a few examples of what I mean by style. And this is a very broad, very broad array. From Arcane to Control to Road Not Taken, etc. So we have, like examples from this entire triangle, and you can tell just how much style there is, or how much like graphic and how simplified the shapes are. And these are all like great indicators of style. Then there's the tone. By tone, I mean that when you work on a game, obviously you have a sense of what is the theme, what is the tone, the mood of the game that you're going to be creating and then playing. And so a few examples of these is a tone can be gritty, it can be horror and cheerful and whimsical. I wrote worn, but I think it's not a perfect word, but like I would say like post-apocalyptic, or something that where there's tons of use and tons of wear and tear, and it's not necessarily quite gritty, but there's plenty of that kind of tone that you can see in many kinds of games. How do you affect the tone? On the art style, not the art style, sorry, but the art treatment is through, and obviously there's more to it, but generally the lighting, the colors that you'll be using, both in your lighting, but also in the environment or the characters, all the surfaces generally. You might add, to enhance the tone, you might add post and screen effects, and especially playing on surfaces, like generally, like you can look at, let's say, a Last of Us, which will be like very gritty and horror, and you compare it to a game like Overwatch, and which is a lot more cheerful and a lot more vibrant and dynamic, and then you can tell right away, even the surfaces have been treated differently to express something completely different in terms of tone, and not just the game itself. And then finally, the medium and today's focus. So as I said earlier, the true medium is video games, but visually there's no true medium for that is specific for games. And so for me, it's the base of your treatment, knowing what kind of game that you're making, of course, and maybe like knowing what kind of style you might like to use. But these can all be multiplied together. So the idea is, what medium can you use? And I'll explain what a medium is right after, but basically you can use any medium that you want as an inspiration for your treatment. We're not limited by technology anymore. Like, I wouldn't have been able to say that 15 years ago. But nowadays, basically everything is within our reach in terms of what's possible, in terms of rendering, in terms of anything that you want. There are plenty of engines that give us a lot of flexibility. Computers nowadays, consoles, and whatever you want. I mean, you can do pretty much anything. So basically, the only limit is your imagination and your visual experience, your visual baggage, like what you bring into the mix is also obviously going to influence the result. So what kind of mediums can we look at? And so this is the first medium that it's a wide, a broad spectrum, I would say, but the kind of medium, the kind of inspiration that you can use, and so this one is obviously more video gamey, but we'll delve into things that are a bit different right after. So I wanted to show something that's, I would call lo-fi. I could have called it, I guess, low polygon, but it's not quite that. It's a little broader than this. Low polygon is obviously Minecraft, but also Mirror Moon. But the Return of the Obra Dinn is not necessarily low poly. It's just that it has a very lo-fi, a very simple look. Proteus is also a very good example, which is basically almost just plains on top of a very, very simple terrain. And so this is the kind of thing that you can look at when you want to do, well, obviously maybe a little more indie game, but I think that there's so much that you can play with in this sphere of treatment medium, that there's a lot to do and a lot of fun to have. Oh yeah. Then obviously, you know, like impossible to escape that one. Pixel art. Pixel art is another kind of medium. It will influence the way that you build things. It's not just a style, as you can tell. Like there are very different styles in this slide, and you know, it's still pixel art. So that's why you have to look at pixel art beyond, you know, what is a style. So a few examples of these, if you don't know all of them. There's Luftrausers, this is Valhalla. Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery EP is a really good example of thinking outside the box while still using pixel art as a good base for a visual treatment. Terraria and, well, Papers, Please, which is a masterpiece. Then again, you don't have to use like those digital looks that we've just seen, even if you're doing something that's 2D. You can try to use a more hand-drawn kind of feeling and treatment. And so this is hand-drawn. Hand-drawn is not often used. It usually suits something a little more whimsical, but you would think that Don't Starve is not that whimsical, and yet it works really well. So that's another good, really example of thinking outside the box, I would say. And really, you know, like the rendering and the result is really, you know, top notch. All right. And then, you know, like we often see concept art. Concept art can be a good inspiration for something that's a little more illustrative. Or motion graphic-y, you know, with parallax and things like this. And so to me, that's also like an extremely worthy example that one could use in order to create an interesting, pertinent, and appealing, especially, not necessarily pertinent, but appealing kind of visual treatment and visual identity for one's game. And then we have minimalism. Minimalism is a very, very broad category, I would say. I tried to include as many examples as I could that were very different. If you haven't played the Unfinished Swan, then I would recommend doing that. It's a really beautiful example of minimalistic treatment. There's Mini Metro, if you like simple puzzly strategy game. Well, not necessarily strategy, but anyway. Limbo was an obvious choice. I could have put Inside also as an example. At the bottom in the center is Ovivo, and we've got Monument Valley in there also. I think it's a very good example of something that offered a very striking and appealing visual identity that really resonated with many people. And so I think there's even more people that know the visual universe of Monument Valley than people that have played it, which is quite a feat. So good job. And then there's the rest, the other 2D. I made like a broad category. I would say like this one is more style driven than medium, but it's still a medium in the sense that 2D is 2D. So that's it. I'm gonna go through that one a bit fast. And then my favorite ones relating to thinking outside the box is, how can you create something that has never been seen before? And often we, in the industry, we tend to really look at one's navel or look at our competitors. And it's important to do that. It's important to know in which ecosystem we belong and that we have to kind of compete with, right? But there's so much more that we can create, so much more that we can propose to our players, but also like to ourselves as creators. It's also fun to play with something that's never really been seen. And so that's why it's the main reason why I decided to make this presentation actually. And so I have quite a few examples. One of them is Zelda cardboard version, which is super interesting. I mean, you could basically scan this and turn it into a real level and it would still work. This dragon made of leaves, dried leaves from, like fall leaves, I think is a very, very cool idea, and there's definitely something that can be used to inspire oneself to create an entire world made of maybe natural surfaces or natural elements. Anyway, there's a Warhammer board game, like sculptures and miniatures. Speaking of sculptures and miniatures, like using Legos as inspiration, a visual inspiration. You could think in, especially maybe for a procedural game, like how can you create something with just like very simple modules, and modules would become your whole art direction. And so it would still look super blocky, but when you embrace the constraints and you really accept them and use them as inspiration, that's when you're no longer just the victim of the constraints, but you actually turn into the mastery of them and then become extremely creative. And then the paper Chun-Li I thought was interesting, kind of the same idea as making the fall dragon. I think could be a very interesting way to do a visual identity, to create a visual identity, maybe with an origami world or maybe something with fabric. So there's plenty of really cool things to do. And the one game, as an example on this slide, is Disco Elysium, because it's inspired by oil painting, and it's a really good example of applying the idea into a game. Then there's something also pretty much outside the gaming world, is generative art. And so I don't, I think this is the kind of topic that might be really popular with graphic designers, and it could work really well on more like strategy games, for example, or very UI heavy games, but maybe something else, who knows. There's so much to do here. I wanted to mention the one image in the center. The top center is from a game called Mu Cartographer. It's a very interesting game, and it's basically just UI and a map. And still, like, it has a very striking visual identity. The one image right below it is from a series of videos that were created by Memo Acton and Keola for the London Olympics in 2012. It's called Forms, and I would invite everyone to go take a look because it's absolutely phenomenal what they did. Basically, they used performance capture or video capture actually, from athletes, and then used this and input it into software, and that recreated the movement of athletes. And so this one, I believe, is I think it's some sort of water water competition. They made one with the pole jumping and all sorts of things, but it's really cool. And then I would recommend that you look at those two names, Memo Acton and Keola, to get some inspiration. There's so much stuff going on with within the generative landscape. What I'm showing right now is just like a tiny fraction of it, and there's so many things that are absolutely beautiful, but also like very refreshing, because they're not bound by the constraints that we have. But it doesn't mean that we can copy one for one, and like, what's the point anyway? But there are many things that are being made by those artists, so why not just take a look at what they do, right? And finally, this is my etc. slide. But basically, there are like far more inspirations to take, and so that's why like I made this slide. So, and specifically, I want to put some emphasis on the game called Her Story, which is emulating like a Windows 95 kind of computer software, and the whole game is made through is played through this interface and watching videotapes. And it's a great game. It's a great narrative experience, and it's made with the simplest of tools, essentially, and yet it's another masterpiece. So why keep using the same kind of looks all the time? I mean, sometimes it does fit, but sometimes there's so much more that we can use to inspire ourselves. And so, to me, let's do some less navel gazing and look at more outside influences. I showed a few things, but there's plenty of other places where you can find inspiration, like other artists and graphic novels, photography, sculpture, movies, arts and crafts, and museum art. Let's not underappreciate all the history of so many, like thousands and thousands and thousands of other creators that have given us such amazing artwork or sculptures, or and there's so much to learn from them and so much to be inspired. So go out there, go to the museum. I promise it can be fun. And then one last thing, because I wanted to add one tiny topic to this, is the week's reflection, and beyond what I just presented, is think about how do you distinguish yourself? What makes your game, like stand out? So what is your one, or maybe more than one, but ideally like not too many. So like, what is your one unique point of identity? So what makes your visual treatment stand out from your competitors? And so I'll give you an example. It's Persona. And in the case of Persona 5, what they did is that they used the graphic design and the extremely prominent graphic design in the UI, and they also like included it in the game. And so for anyone that's played, but also anyone that's never played the game, when they think about Persona, or the most prominent thing that may come up to mind is this graphic design. It's also something that is paralleled in the branding and something very strong in the visual identity, more so than the environments or some of the characters or the rendering itself, or whatever else. So think about this. So, recap. There are many choices available, not just one or two. Again, instead of looking at traditional games, look outside the industry, or look at innovative and, like kind of outside the mainstream kind of games. Think of what makes your visual treatment stand out from other games, especially the ones that are similar to yours, to make a pertinent choice. Either you choose to do something completely different to stand out, or sometimes you want to do something very similar because you think that you can kind of surf that wave also. So, but you have to think about this at the very least. And also, whatever you do, you can always remix ideas and turn them into something new. Earlier I showed the dried leaves. Maybe you can mix that with paper origami, or maybe you mix it with the sculpture, like the miniatures from Warhammer. Who knows? So there's so many things that you can do. So just like think about all of these and see like, oh, what can I do to make it fresh, right? And then research your treatment well so you can enhance and master the results. Obviously, you may have feelings. You may really like visual treatments, but if you don't really know what makes it work and what things don't make it work, then it's going to be harder to achieve a satisfying result. So think about this. And with that, I want to say thank you for, watching this panel, and I'll see you next week.